My name is Byron. I'm 28 years old and work as a software engineer in Boston. All my life, my own family made it clear I wasn't welcome at their gatherings. The constant rejection hurt, but I learned to build walls. Now, as I plan my wedding with my longtime girlfriend Rachel, I've made a decision that feels both liberating and painful. They won't be invited. What I never expected was their explosive reaction and demands to fix things after years of pushing me away. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family relationships, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. This journey gets intense. The seeds of my family rejection were planted early. I was just 6 years old when my parents divorced. The memory is still vivid in my mind, sitting on our faded blue couch, my legs swinging above the floor as my mother explained that Daddy wouldn't be living with us anymore. My child mind couldn't fully grasp what that meant, but I understood enough to know that everything was about to change. Within a year, my mother remarried. Her new husband, James, was successful and wealthy, the owner of a chain of high-end furniture stores across the Northeast. He had 2 children from his previous marriage, Mason, who was 2 years older than me, and Nora, who was a year younger. On paper, we seemed like the perfect blended family. Reality proved cruelly different. From the beginning, it was clear that James viewed me as an unfortunate accessory that came along with my mother. He never said it outright, at least not in those early days, but his actions spoke volumes. When he took Mason fishing, I wasn't invited. When he helped Nora with her homework, he'd tell me to go figure things out myself because I needed to learn independence. I remember how hard I tried in those first few years. I wanted so desperately to be accepted into this new family unit. I kept my room spotless. I offered to help with dishes after dinner. I even pretended to be interested in football because James and Mason were obsessed with the Patriots. Nothing worked. James maintained a clear distinction between his real children and me. Mason quickly picked up on this dynamic and began treating me like an unwelcome houseguest. He would accidentally break my toys and blame me for leaving them around. He'd eat the snacks my mom packed specially for my lunch. Small cruelties, but they added up. Nora was different. She didn't actively participate in the exclusion, but she knew better than to form an alliance with me. She kept her distance, clearly understanding the family hierarchy. What hurt the most was watching my mother change. Before the remarriage, she had been my fierce protector, the one person I knew would always have my back. But gradually, subtly, she began to shift her priorities. When conflicts arose between James's children and me, she increasingly took their side or remained silent. It was as if she feared rocking the boat with her new husband more than she cared about standing up for her own son. My 10th birthday was a turning point. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, dropping hints about a new bike I'd seen at the mall. The day came, and we had a small, rushed celebration before James whisked the family off to Mason's basketball game. My mother apologized but said we'd make it up later. We never did. 2 weeks later, Mason's birthday party was an elaborate affair at an indoor water park with 15 of his friends. A month after that, Nora's celebration was equally lavish. I learned a valuable lesson that year. I was on my own. I threw myself into my studies and books, finding companions in characters who couldn't reject me. I built forts of pillows and blankets in my room and read late into the night, creating my own world where I had control and belonged. My biological father lived on the other side of the country in California. He called occasionally on birthdays, and Christmas sent cards with $20 bills tucked inside, but he had a new family too. His obligatory gestures of affection were too infrequent and distant to fill the growing void in my life. By the time I reached middle school, I had constructed a careful emotional fortress around myself. I became the quiet kid who excelled in class but kept to himself. Teachers often commented on my maturity, not realizing it was born from necessity rather than natural development. I learned to need very little from others. It was safer that way. At home, I became nearly invisible. I would slip in through the side door after school, grab a snack from the kitchen, and retreat to my room to do homework. Dinners were exercises in silence as I listened to Mason talk about sports. Nora discussed dance recitals, and James hold court with stories about his business dealings. My mother occasionally asked me about school, but my brief answers satisfied her obligation to acknowledge my presence. Holidays were particularly difficult. Extended family would visit, and the contrast between how they treated James's children versus me was stark. Christmas presents for Mason and Nora piled high under the tree, while I received practical items like socks or school supplies. Family photos were arranged with me awkwardly positioned on the periphery, as if the photographer couldn't quite figure out where I belonged in the frame, because in truth, I didn't belong at all. High school should have been a time of self-discovery and social exploration. For me, it became a period of increasingly painful exclusion from my family, contrasted with the first taste of recognition for my abilities outside the home. I threw myself into academics with an intensity that surprised even my teachers. It wasn't just about learning, it was about proving my worth to myself, if to no one else. Math and science came naturally to me, and I quickly rose to the top of my class. My report cards were filled with A+, but they generated none of the celebration that Mason's C+ in algebra did, or Nora's B- in English. The stark difference in how our achievements were treated became painfully clear during my sophomore year. Mason had managed to score the winning basket in a regional basketball game, an undeniably exciting moment for him. For weeks afterward, James recounted the story to anyone who would listen. A framed photo of Mason holding the trophy went up in the living room. Meanwhile, when I won first place in the state science fair with a project on algorithmic efficiency, no one from my family bothered to attend the ceremony. I still remember standing on that stage, scanning the audience for a familiar face, and finding none. My chemistry teacher, Dr. Wallace Peterson, seemed to understand what was happening. After the ceremony, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "That was exceptional work, Byron," he said. "You have a real gift for computational thinking. Have you considered a future in computer science?" Dr. Peterson became the mentor I so desperately needed. He loaned me books on programming, stayed after school to teach me coding languages, and most importantly, he saw me, not as an inconvenience or an afterthought, but as a young man with potential. Under his guidance, I began to develop the skills that would eventually shape my career. During my junior year, I got a part-time job at the local library. The head librarian, Mrs. Adler, was a kind woman who appreciated my organizational skills and quiet efficiency. The library became a sanctuary, a place where I was valued and where I could save money for college. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account. I was determined to forge my own path, fully aware that I couldn't count on family support. As my high school years progressed, the exclusion from family events became more overt. There were summer barbecues I wasn't told about until I came downstairs to find the house empty. There were weekend trips to visit James's parents where I was left behind because there wasn't enough room in the car. When I was 16, James didn't even pretend anymore. Before a Thanksgiving gathering at his sister's house, he simply told me, "It would be better if you didn't come. Things are just easier that way." My mother stood next to him as he said this. She looked at the floor, her silence confirming her complicity. That night, I ate a microwave turkey dinner alone in my room while scrolling through social media posts of my family smiling around a lavish table. It was around this time that I formed what would become the most important friendship of my young life. Benjamin Turner sat next to me in advanced placement physics. Loud where I was quiet, outgoing where I was reserved, we seemed like unlikely friends. But Benjamin had a perceptiveness that saw through my carefully constructed walls. "You never talk about your family," he noted one day as we worked on a lab project together. "Mine drives me crazy, but in a good way. You want to come over for dinner Friday? My mom makes this incredible lasagna." That Friday dinner changed everything for me. The Turners' home wasn't particularly large or fancy, but it radiated warmth. Benjamin's parents asked me questions about my interests and actually listened to the answers. His younger sisters bickered good-naturedly across the table. Mr. Turner told terrible dad jokes that made everyone groan. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely wonderful. I became a regular fixture at the Turner household. They included me in family game nights, summer picnics, even their annual camping trip. Mrs. Turner would sometimes send Benjamin to school with extra homemade cookies just for me. Mr. Turner taught me how to change the oil in a car and fix a leaky faucet, practical skills that James had never bothered to share. Through the Turners, I caught a glimpse of what family could and should be. It was both healing and heartbreaking. Healing to be included, heartbreaking to realize what I had been missing all along. The contrast between my two worlds reached its peak at high school graduation. As I lined up with my classmates in our blue caps and gowns, I peered into the audience. In the fourth row sat my mother and James, who had come out of a sense of obligation rather than pride. They left immediately after the ceremony, not bothering to stay for the reception. but in the third row was the entire Turner family, holding up a handmade sign that read, "Congratulations, Byron, we're so proud of you." Dr. Peterson was there too, beaming when my name was called as class valedictorian. That spring, I received my acceptance letter to MIT, with a full scholarship, an achievement that should have been celebrated by any family. When I shared the news at dinner, James responded with, "Well, I guess you won't need to ask us for money then," while my mother offered a tepid, "That's nice, dear." Meanwhile, Mason's acceptance to a state college on a partial sports scholarship was commemorated with a special dinner and gifts. I packed for MIT that August with the knowledge that I was not just leaving for college, I was leaving behind the fantasy that my family would ever truly accept me. Stepping onto the MIT campus felt like taking my first real breath after years of suffocation. The sprawling buildings filled with brilliant minds, innovative technology, and endless possibilities represented everything I had worked for. Most importantly, no one here knew me as the unwanted stepson or the family afterthought. In Cambridge, I could finally be just Byron, a student with potential. My freshman dorm room was small but entirely mine. I decorated it with science posters and a small cactus, my first houseplant. My roommate Derek was a physics major from Seattle with an infectious enthusiasm for quantum mechanics. Unlike my family, he actually wanted to hear my thoughts and ideas. We would stay up late debating theoretical concepts, sharing snacks, and building a friendship that came easily without the constant fear of rejection. MIT was challenging in all the right ways. The coursework pushed me to my intellectual limits, but for the first time I was surrounded by people who valued the very parts of me that my family had dismissed. My programming skills, my analytical thinking, my problem-solving abilities, these were assets here, not inconveniences. I joined the robotics club and the coding competition team, finding communities where I belonged. Weekends that had once been spent hiding in my room were now filled with hackathons, study groups, and occasional parties. I was discovering that I wasn't inherently unlikable or unworthy of inclusion. I had simply been in an environment that couldn't appreciate who I was. During my sophomore year, I took an advanced algorithms class with Professor Robert Harris. A renowned computer scientist with a bushy beard and kind eyes, he quickly noticed my work. After one particularly challenging assignment where I had developed an innovative solution, he asked me to stay after class. "Your approach to the traveling salesman problem was elegant," he said, eyes crinkling with genuine interest. "Have you considered pursuing research?" Under Professor Harris's mentorship, I began working in his lab, eventually co-authoring my first academic paper as an undergraduate, a rare achievement. He invited me to dinner at his home, introduced me to colleagues at conferences, and provided the kind of fatherly guidance I had always craved. When I hesitantly shared some of my family background with him, he listened without judgment. "Family is complicated," he told me. "But remember, Byron, the people who fail to see your worth are revealing their limitations, not yours." During my junior year, I landed an internship at a prestigious software company in Cambridge. The experience confirmed that I had found my calling. Writing code felt like speaking a language I had been born knowing. I loved the clarity of it, the logical progression, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. I was good at it, and being good at something that mattered in the real world helped heal some of my deepest insecurities. My relationship with my family grew increasingly distant. I returned home for major holidays during my freshman and sophomore years, but each visit reinforced why I had been so eager to leave. Nothing had changed. I was still the outsider. Mason, who had dropped out of college to work at one of James's stores, was treated like the golden child. Nora, studying fashion design, was the apple of her father's eye. The Christmas break of my junior year marked my breaking point. I had arrived home on December 23rd, planning to stay through New Year's. The house was decorated lavishly, with a 12-foot tree in the foyer, and professional garlands winding up the staircase. That evening, I came downstairs to find the dining room filled with guests, extended family, and James's business associates gathered for a holiday party I hadn't been told about. James pulled me aside in the kitchen. "We weren't expecting you tonight," he said, his voice low but edged with irritation. "Could you maybe stay in your room? There's a weird vibe when you're around the family." I looked past him to where my mother was laughing with James's sister, a glass of wine in her hand. She glanced over, saw us talking, and quickly looked away. "Sure," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the familiar pain blooming in my chest. "I'll stay out of your way." I went back to my room, packed my bags, and called Benjamin, who was home from UCLA for the holidays. His family welcomed me without question, setting an extra place at their Christmas dinner, and even having a small gift for me under their tree. A Turner family tradition they had maintained despite my being across the country. I never went back to my mother's house after that night. I stayed with the Turners until it was time to return to MIT, and when spring break came, I remained on campus to work on research. I called my mother once to explain my decision. The conversation was brief and strained. "I don't understand why you're being so dramatic," she said. "James was just trying to make things comfortable for everyone." "That's the problem, Mom," I replied. "Everyone's comfort has always mattered, except mine." That was the last meaningful conversation we had. There were occasional texts after that, terse birthday wishes, impersonal holiday greetings, but the pretense of a family relationship had finally been dropped. My senior year at MIT was my most successful yet. I focused entirely on my studies, my research with Professor Harris, and my growing circle of genuine friends. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from several top tech companies. As I stood on stage receiving my diploma, I searched the crowd just as I had at my high school graduation. This time, I found Professor Harris Benjamin and his parents who had flown in for the ceremony, and several of my MIT friends cheering loudly. The faces that mattered were there. I accepted a position with a leading software company in Boston, choosing to stay in Massachusetts rather than heading to Silicon Valley, like many of my classmates. Boston had become home, the first place where I had truly felt I belonged. As I signed the lease on my first apartment, a small but modern one-bedroom in Cambridge, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond academic or professional success. I had built a life for myself, despite not because of my family. I was 22 years old, and for the first time I was completely free to determine what family would mean for me going forward. Boston suited me. The city's blend of historic charm and cutting-edge innovation mirrored my own balance between old wounds and new beginnings. My career at Vertex Software flourished as I quickly moved from junior developer to project lead. Work provided structure, purpose, and a community of like-minded individuals who respected my abilities. I built a reputation as the guy who could solve the unsolvable problems, the one who stayed late to help colleagues debug their code, the team member everyone wanted on their projects. Outside of work, I maintained a small but solid circle of friends, mostly fellow MIT graduates and colleagues. We gathered for board game nights, hiked the trails around Boston, and debated the latest developments in technology over craft beers. It was a good life if somewhat compartmentalized. I kept relationships at a comfortable distance, never revealing too much about my past. Then came the day that changed everything. It was at a tech conference downtown, one of those industry events with panel discussions and networking opportunities that my company encouraged us to attend. I was sitting in on a session about user experience design when the presenter posed a question to the audience. A woman 2 rows ahead raised her hand and offered an answer that was so insightful, so perfectly articulated, that I found myself leaning forward in my seat to catch every word. Her name tag read, Rachel Winters, UX Design Lead. She had auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, glasses that kept sliding down her nose as she spoke, and a confidence that wasn't showy but ran deep. When the session ended, I found myself navigating through the crowd to introduce myself. "That was a brilliant point you made about emotional mapping and interface design," I said, immediately cringing at how rehearsed it sounded. She smiled, pushing those sliding glasses back up. "Thanks. I've been fighting that battle at my company for months. Sometimes it feels like I'm speaking a different language." "I know exactly what you mean," I replied, and somehow we ended up talking through the next session and into the lunch break. Rachel worked for a competing software firm, designing the interfaces that made complex programs accessible to average users. Where I built the bones of software, she gave it a face people could understand and connect with. Our professional perspectives complemented each other perfectly. We exchanged business cards for professional collaboration. We both pretended, but I emailed her the very next day with a question about user interface that could have easily been answered by anyone on my own team. She responded with a lunch invitation to discuss it properly, and just like that, we began dating. Rachel was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She approached the world with a designer's eye, seeing possibilities for improvement everywhere, believing that most problems could be solved with enough creative thinking. She was funny in a quiet way, dropping observations that would make me laugh days later when I remembered them. She was kind without being a pushover, setting boundaries when needed, but generous with her time and attention. For months, I kept our conversations focused on the present, our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite spots in Boston. She spoke freely about her close-knit family in Vermont, her college years at Rhode Island School of Design, her dream of someday designing interfaces for educational software to help children learn. I deflected questions about my past, with vague references to growing up in Connecticut and studying at MIT. 6 months into our relationship, as we cooked dinner together in my apartment, she gently called me out. "You know everything about my family," she said, chopping bell peppers with precise movements. "You've heard all my embarrassing childhood stories. But whenever I ask about yours, you change the subject. What are you not telling me, Byron?" I nearly cut myself slicing onions. The question hung in the air between us, impossible to deflect any longer. So I told her. Everything. The divorce, the remarriage, James and his children, the systematic exclusion, the holidays spent alone, the achievements ignored, the final Christmas I walked out. I expected pity, or worse, that look of discomfort people get when you've shared too much too soon. Instead, Rachel set down her knife, walked around the counter, and wrapped her arms around me from behind, as I continued chopping onions now with blurry vision. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "That must have been so lonely for you." Just that acknowledgement, without judgment. She didn't try to offer silver linings or suggest I reach out to reconcile. She just validated what I had experienced and held space for my feelings about it. In that moment, I knew I was falling in love with her. Over the next few months, Rachel gradually introduced me to her family. First, her brother Thomas, who lived in Boston and worked as a physical therapist. He and I connected immediately over a shared love of hiking and terrible science fiction movies. Then a weekend trip to Vermont to meet her parents, David and Margaret Winters. The Winters home was a renovated farmhouse with mismatched, comfortable furniture walls lined with bookshelves and family photos everywhere. They welcomed me with genuine warmth that went beyond politeness. David, a high school history teacher, showed me his woodworking shop in the barn. Margaret, a pediatric nurse, insisted on sending me home with containers of homemade soup and cookies. They asked questions about my work, my interests, my opinions on current events, and they listened to my answers. After that first visit, David sent me emails with links to articles he thought I'd find interesting. Margaret mailed care packages to our apartment with handwritten notes addressed to both Rachel and me. Thomas began inviting me to join his weekend basketball game, even when Rachel was away on business trips. I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The easy affection, the inside jokes, the way they could disagree without it threatening their connection, it was all new to me. Sometimes I would catch myself holding back, waiting for the other shoe to drop for some sign that I wasn't really welcome in their circle. "Your family now," Margaret told me one Thanksgiving, catching me washing dishes alone in the kitchen while everyone else watched football. "You don't have to earn your place here." Those words hit me like a physical force. I hadn't realized how much I had been performing, trying to make myself useful, valuable enough to keep around. The idea that I could just be accepted without proving my worth was revolutionary. After 3 years together, Rachel and I had built a life that felt solid and real. We had moved in together, adopting a rescue cat named Algorithm Alley for short, who had a habit of walking across keyboards at the least convenient moments. We had favorite restaurants, weekend routines, a shared language of inside jokes and references. We had weathered job changes, a flooded apartment, Rachel's father's minor heart scare, and come out stronger. On our 3rd anniversary, I took her back to the conference center where we'd first met. I had arranged for access to the now empty presentation room, where she had asked that insightful question. As we stood at the front where the speakers had presented, I dropped to one knee and asked her to marry me. The ring was a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Blue had always been her favorite color. "Yes," she said immediately, tears streaming behind those perpetually sliding glasses. "Absolutely, yes." As we began planning our wedding for the following spring, the question I had been avoiding finally had to be addressed. Would I invite my family? Planning a wedding is stressful under the best circumstances. For someone like me, with my complicated family history, it became an emotional minefield. Each decision, from the venue to the guest list, forced me to confront questions I had successfully avoided for years. Rachel and I sat at our kitchen table one evening, laptops open, spreadsheets displayed, trying to create a preliminary guest list. She had already added her parents, brother, aunts, uncles, and a handful of cousins she was close to. "What about your side?" she asked gently, her cursor hovering over the empty column with my name at the top. I stared at the screen. "I have Professor Harris Benjamin and his parents." "And your family?" Rachel's voice was neutral, careful not to push, but asking the question that couldn't be avoided. "They're not my family," I replied more sharply than I intended. "Not in any way that matters." Rachel closed her laptop and reached for my hand. "I know they hurt you, Byron. Repeatedly and deeply. And whatever you decide, I support you completely. But I want you to be sure. Weddings are one of those life moments that bring up all sorts of emotions. I just don't want you to look back years from now and wonder if you should have given them one more chance." Her concern was reasonable, loving even. But she hadn't been there. She hadn't experienced the 1,000 small rejections that had accumulated over the years. "If I invite them," I said slowly, "best-case scenario is they come and make the day uncomfortable for everyone. Worst case is they decline, and I get to feel rejected all over again on what should be the happiest day of our lives. I can't see any outcome where their presence adds anything positive." Rachel nodded. "Then that's your answer. This is our day, and we should be surrounded by people who genuinely care about us." The decision was made. We would not invite my mother, James, Mason, or Nora. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders once it was settled. Our wedding planning proceeded with a new lightness, choosing flowers, simple arrangements of blue hydrangeas and white roses, selecting a venue, a converted warehouse in downtown Boston, with exposed brick and industrial charm-tasting cakes. Lemon with buttercream frosting won out. 3 months before the wedding, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Heard about your wedding from Keith at Vertex. Congrats, man. Mason." My half-brother and I had exactly 0 mutual connections as far as I knew. Then I remembered Keith from my office had gone to the same state college as Mason. They must have stayed in touch through social media or alumni events. I didn't respond to the text. 2 days later, my phone rang with my mother's number. I had kept it in my contacts all these years despite our minimal communication. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Byron, it's Mom." Her voice sounded older, more tentative than I remembered. "Hi," I replied, unsure what else to say. "I hear congratulations are in order. You're getting married." "Yes, to Rachel, in May." An awkward silence stretched between us. "Finally," she continued, "we haven't received an invitation yet. I assume it got lost in the mail." The audacity of the assumption took my breath away. After years of excluding me from family events, after making it explicitly clear I wasn't welcome, she expected an automatic invitation to my wedding. "It's not lost," I said evenly. We decided to keep the guest list small. Just people who have been supportive and present in our lives. Another pause, longer this time. "I see," she said, her voice hardening. "So you're punishing us for past mistakes. That's very mature, Byron." "I'm not punishing anyone," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm choosing to share an important day with people who actually care about me. People who have shown up for me. That's not you or James or Mason and Nora." "We are your family," she insisted. "No," I said firmly. "You're biologically related to me. That's not the same thing." "You need to fix this, Byron," she said, anger now evident in her voice. "You need to send us invitations and stop this childish behavior. James is very upset that his family is being treated this way." I nearly laughed out loud at that. His family? I was never part of his family, and we both know it. I have to go now. "Byron." I ended the call, hands shaking. Rachel found me sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall. "Your mom?" she asked, sitting beside me. Apparently, the family grapevine is active. She knows about the wedding and expects to be invited. Rachel put her arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" "I will be," I said, leaning into her warmth. "It just caught me off guard." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next week, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls. Mason sent several messages evolving from faux casual to openly hostile. "Seriously, dude, where's our invites? Mom is really upset. Just send the invitations. You always were a selfish little prick. After everything our family did for you." Nora, who had barely spoken 10 words to me during our years living together, suddenly had a lot to say via text. "This is so hurtful to Mom. How can you be so cruel?" James paid for your food and clothes and education for years, and this is how you thank him. You were always playing the victim. Nobody excluded you, you excluded yourself with your attitude. Then came the extended family. Aunts I hadn't spoken to in a decade, cousins I wouldn't recognize if I passed them on the street. Even James's mother, a woman who had pointedly given Christmas gifts to Mason and Nora while handing me gift cards with the price stickers still attached. The messages all carried the same theme: I was ungrateful, I was cruel, I was punishing good people who had only ever tried to include me in their family. It was gaslighting on a grand scale. Every one of these people had witnessed my systematic exclusion over the years. Many had actively participated in it. Yet now they were rewriting history, casting themselves as the wounded parties and me as the villain. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. I was in an important client meeting when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are two people insisting on seeing you. They say they're your parents, and it's an emergency." My heart sank. I excused myself from the meeting and went to the lobby where James and my mother were waiting. James, silver-haired now but still imposing in an expensive suit, stood with his arms crossed. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her expression was familiar, that mixture of disappointment and disapproval I had grown up with. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I'm in the middle of a workday." "We wouldn't have to come to your workplace if you returned phone calls," James said. "This has gone on long enough," my mother added. "We need to talk about the wedding." "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly. "Rachel and I have made our decision. You're not invited." "You can't do this," James said, his voice rising. "We are your family." Several of my colleagues glanced over curiously. My professional reputation, which I had worked so hard to build, was on the line. "This is not the place," I said. "Please leave before security has to escort you out." "We're not leaving until you agree to be reasonable," my mother insisted. "If you don't invite us, we'll just show up anyway. You can't keep us out of a public venue." That threat to crash my wedding, to ruin what should be a joyful day for Rachel and me, was the final confirmation that I had made the right decision. These people didn't care about my happiness. They cared about appearances, about their own sense of entitlement, about maintaining the fiction of a happy family. "If you try to attend uninvited," I said, my voice cold and clear, "you will be removed. Now please leave. This conversation is over." I turned and walked away, returning to my meeting with as much composure as I could muster. That evening, as Rachel and I discussed the incident, I made a decision. "I need to make sure they can't disrupt our day," I said, "but I don't know how to handle this." Rachel squeezed my hand. "I might have a solution. My cousin Lauren is a family attorney. Let me give her a call." The confrontation at my workplace left me shaken. In the days that followed, I found myself jumping every time my phone rang, scanning crowds for familiar faces, feeling a sense of dread when the doorbell chimed. The stress began affecting my sleep, my appetite, my ability to focus at work. "They've taken enough from you," Rachel said one night as I picked at my dinner. "Don't let them take your peace of mind, too." She was right, but knowing that didn't make it easier to shake the anxiety. The threats to crash our wedding felt all too real, especially given their willingness to show up at my office unannounced. What would stop them from following through? Rachel's cousin Lauren agreed to meet with us at her law office downtown. A sharply dressed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, she listened carefully as I explained the situation. "Unfortunately, this kind of family drama around weddings isn't uncommon," she said when I finished. "But the workplace visit and threats to crash the event, those cross a line." "What can we do?" Rachel asked. "You have options," Lauren replied. "The most immediate step is to hire security for your venue professionals who can discreetly check guests against your approved list and handle any unwanted visitors." I nodded. That seemed like a practical precaution. "Beyond that," Lauren continued, "we could send a formal cease and desist letter. It's not legally binding in itself, but it establishes a paper trail showing you've explicitly asked them to stop contacting you and to stay away from your wedding." "Would that actually work?" I asked skeptically. "It depends," Lauren said. "For reasonable people, a letter on legal letterhead is often enough to make them reconsider their actions. For others," she shrugged, "it at least puts them on notice that you're serious and willing to take legal steps. And if they ignore it, then we can discuss more serious options like a restraining order. But let's start with the letter and see what happens." I agreed, and Lauren drafted a document that was both professionally cold and startlingly clear. It formally requested that my mother, James, Mason, Nora, and several extended family members cease all contact with me and Rachel, stay away from our home and workplaces, and make no attempt to attend our wedding. It outlined potential legal consequences if they failed to comply. When I read the final draft, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. There was something so final about seeing it all laid out in legal language, the official documentation of a family relationship beyond repair. "You don't have to do this," Rachel said, softly watching my face as I read. "We can find another way." I shook my head. "No, this is necessary. I've tried setting boundaries with words alone. They don't listen. Maybe this will get through." The letters were sent by certified mail requiring signatures to confirm receipt. 3 days later, my phone rang with my mother's number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered and put it on speaker so Rachel could hear. A cease and desist letter. Really, Byron? My mother's voice was tight with anger. "You're threatening legal action against your own family." "You showed up at my workplace," I replied calmly. "You threatened to crash my wedding. You've been harassing me with calls and messages for weeks. The letter simply asks you to stop." "This is beyond hurtful," she said. "I raised you better than this." "Did you?" I asked. The question had been building inside me for years. Did you really raise me to respect myself? Because from where I'm standing, you taught me to accept being treated as less than. You taught me that I should be grateful for crumbs of attention while Mason and Nora got the whole banquet. "That's not fair," she protested. "We always included you." "No, you didn't," I said firmly. "And what's most painful is that you know that's true, but you won't admit it. Not even now." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, without the defensive edge. "I know I wasn't always the mother you deserved," she said quietly. "After the divorce, I was so afraid of being alone. James offered security stability. He had conditions, though. He was particular about how he wanted our family to function. And I didn't fit into his vision I supplied. It wasn't that simple," she sighed. "But I should have protected you better. I can see that now." For a moment I felt a flicker of the connection we'd once had long ago before James entered our lives. But then she continued, "That's why you need to put this behind you now. Send the invitations, Byron. Show that you've grown past all this. Be the bigger person." And just like that, the moment was gone. Even now, in what should have been an apology, she was placing the responsibility on me to fix things, to make peace, to accommodate the very people who had rejected me repeatedly. "I can't do that," I said, "not because I'm holding a grudge, but because I've finally learned what family should be. It's people who support you, who show up for you, who make you feel valued rather than tolerated. That's what I'll have at my wedding." "So this is your final answer? After everything we've done for you?" "Yes," I said simply. "This is my final answer." "Then I hope you can live with your decision," she replied, her voice cold again. "Goodbye, Byron." The call ended. Rachel, who had been sitting beside me throughout the conversation, took my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. Actually, yes. For the first time in a long time, I think I am. Something had shifted in that conversation. My mother had briefly acknowledged her failings, even if she couldn't fully own them. And I had stated my boundaries clearly without anger or apology. It felt like the closing of a chapter that had been left unresolved for too long. In the weeks that followed, there were no more calls, no more texts, no more unexpected visits. The letter had worked, or perhaps that final conversation had finally made clear what I had been trying to say for years. I was done seeking approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. We hired security for our wedding venue, as Lauren had suggested, discreet professionals who would check guests against our list and handle any disruptions without creating a scene. We also gave photographs of my family members to the venue staff just in case. As our wedding day approached, I found myself thinking less about my biological family and more about the family we were creating. Rachel and me, supported by her parents who had welcomed me without reservation. My mentor, Professor Harris, who had believed in me when no one else did. Benjamin and his parents, who had shown me what family could be: colleagues who had become friends, and friends who had become family. The night before our wedding, Rachel's father, David, took me aside during the rehearsal dinner. "I know tomorrow might bring up some complicated feelings for you," he said, his hand on my shoulder. "I want you to know how proud we are to be gaining you as a son-in-law. You're a remarkable young man, Byron. Any family would be fortunate to have you." His words, so simple and heartfelt, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. All those years of feeling unwanted, and here was this man who had no biological obligation to me whatsoever, offering the fatherly validation I had craved for so long. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more than you know." David smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the same way Rachel's did. "Family isn't about blood, son. It's about who shows up. And we'll always show up for you and Rachel, remember that." As we parted ways that night, Rachel to stay with her parents, as per tradition, me to our apartment, I felt a profound sense of peace. The family drama that had consumed so much of my attention these past months no longer seemed important. I was marrying the woman I loved tomorrow, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us. What more could anyone ask for? The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect spring days that seemed designed specifically for new beginnings. Standing in front of the mirror in my hotel room adjusting my tie for the 10th time, I was struck by a realization. I wasn't nervous about the ceremony itself. I was excited to marry Rachel, to publicly declare our commitment to each other. What had me fidgeting was the lingering worry about unwanted guests, about a scene that would mar our perfect day. Benjamin knocked on my door at precisely 9:30, right on schedule. My oldest friend looked sharp in his best man's suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "Ready for this?" he asked, grinning as he entered. "More than ready," I replied honestly. "Wedding security reports all clear," he said, only half joking. Benjamin had appointed himself my personal guardian throughout the planning process, fiercely protective of my happiness on this day. Perimeter secured. Operation Wedding is a go. I laughed, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Thanks for having my back. Not just today, but always." "That's what family does," Benjamin replied, simply clapping me on the shoulder. "Now let's get you married." The venue looked even more beautiful than I had imagined. The converted warehouse space had been transformed with strings of soft lights, arrangements of blue and white flowers, and tables set with elegant simplicity. Through the tall windows, the Boston skyline provided a dramatic backdrop. I stood at the front of the room, Benjamin beside me, watching as guests filled the rows of chairs. Professor Harris sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The Turners waved enthusiastically from the third row. Rachel's extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, I was still learning to keep straight, occupied a large section to the right. Colleagues and friends we'd made together filled in the rest. There were no empty seats where my family should have been. We had planned the seating carefully to avoid any obvious gaps. Still, I couldn't help but feel a momentary pang as I scanned the crowd. Not regret exactly, but acknowledgement of what should have been in a kinder world. The music changed, signaling the start of the procession. Thomas escorted his mother down the aisle, followed by Rachel's cousin Lauren with her husband. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The doors opened, and there stood Rachel on her father's arm. Her dress was simple and elegant, her auburn hair swept up with a few tendrils framing her face. Those perpetually sliding glasses had been replaced with contacts for the day, allowing me to see her eyes clearly as they found mine across the room. The look we shared in that moment contained everything: our past, our present, our future, all the love and understanding that had brought us to this point. As tradition dictated, David would walk Rachel down the aisle and give her away. But Rachel had suggested a modification to this part of the ceremony that had touched me deeply. When they reached the front, David embraced me as well. "Two fathers should be standing here today," he whispered, for my ears alone. "Since one is not, please know that I am proud enough for two." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. We had written our own vows, promises that acknowledged the specific journey that had brought us together. Rachel spoke of building a home where both of us would always belong, of creating a family defined by love rather than obligation. I promised to cherish the gift of her trust, to never take for granted the family we were creating together. "The family we choose is the strongest family of all," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "And I choose you, Rachel, today and every day forward." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. As we turned to face our guests as a married couple, I saw nothing but genuine joy on the faces before us. No family drama, no unwanted confrontations, just pure celebration from people who truly wished us well. The reception that followed was everything we had hoped for. Good food, heartfelt toasts, dancing that went late into the night. Benjamin's best man speech had everyone alternately laughing and wiping away tears. Professor Harris raised a toast to the brightest student I've ever taught, who has now made the smartest decision of his life. Margaret and David welcomed me officially into their family with words that made it clear I had always belonged there. As Rachel and I swayed together during our first dance, she whispered, "Any regrets about the guest list?" I shook my head. "None. This is perfect. Everyone who should be here is here." She smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. "That's what matters." Later, as the party continued around us, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool, the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. I thought about the long, sometimes painful journey that had led to this moment. The exclusion I had experienced from my biological family had left deep wounds. For years I had carried the weight of their rejection, allowing it to shape how I saw myself and my place in the world. But standing here now on my wedding day, surrounded by people who had chosen to love me, I realized something profound, that rejection had been a reflection of their limitations, not my worth. In losing the family I was born into, I had been forced to seek connection elsewhere. That search had led me to the Turners, to Professor Harris, to friends who valued me for exactly who I was. It had ultimately led me to Rachel and the Winters family, who had shown me what unconditional acceptance feels like. Most importantly, the journey had taught me to value myself, to recognize that I deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, not as an afterthought or an inconvenience. The year following our wedding brought even more joy as Rachel and I welcomed our son, David James Winter Harris. We chose to honor both her father and my mentor in his name, the two men who had shown me what fatherhood should be. Holding my son for the first time, I made a silent promise he would never question his place in our family. He would always know he was wanted, valued, and loved exactly as he was. Being a father has deepened my understanding of what family truly means. It's not about shared DNA or legal relationships. It's about showing up consistently. It's about celebrating victories, both large and small. It's about creating a safe space where everyone feels seen and heard. It's about love that doesn't keep score or come with conditions. I occasionally wonder about my biological family. I heard through Benjamin that my mother and James moved to Florida after he sold his business. Mason apparently works for a sporting goods company now. Nora is married with a child of her own. I wish them well genuinely. But I don't regret maintaining the boundaries I established. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to acknowledge when a relationship cannot be healthy. Sometimes the family you build from scratch is stronger than the one you were born into. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest peace. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you've experienced your own version of family rejection or conditional acceptance. If so, I want you to know this: you deserve better. You deserve to be surrounded by people who recognize your worth, who celebrate your successes, who show up when you need them. Sometimes finding that means making difficult choices and setting firm boundaries. Have you ever had to choose between family obligation and self-respect? Has your definition of family evolved over time? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar issues. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Sharing these experiences helps us all feel a little less alone in our journeys. Thank you for listening, and remember, the family that matters most is the one that treats you like you matter.